Welcome into the first Power BI Accelerator session. Welcome in, Brian. Thanks for joining me today, and thanks for being the lead on this new initiative that we've been running through Enterprise DNA. I think we've received. It's been incredibly popular, and I think we're expecting a number of people on this call, to sort of discuss the solutions and also just the problem-solving techniques that we use to actually go into creating a quality solution on this. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really excited about this one myself. We've got great engagement on the first week's problem. That I think it was the most popular post we had over the last quarter. We got people from all around the world participating. Got really good community discussion going on the forum. And one of the things I really liked was how everybody seemed to kind of customize the problem and the solution to kind of meet their own level and training needs. And so, the beginning users really kind of stuck to the script, which is great. That was the intent. And the more advanced users, kind of added some additional challenge and hurdles into that to test themselves. So great job, everybody, on this. So what we want to do, let me share screen real quick.
Yeah, what I think would be great as well, Brian, is maybe just jumping in very quickly into reasons for creating the accelerator and why this is a huge initiative from Enterprise DNA going forward.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an outgrowth of some of the other things that we started. Particularly Problem of the Week, where we wanted to have something that was a little bit less intensive than the data challenges. Somebody could jump into just for an hour every other week or so, and really train, do some learning. And what we found in that was that it worked well as a model, but generally the problems that we were using were a bit too high level for most of the users. And so what we did is we kind of retooled what was working in that approach, and then kind of squared that with the analytics that we'd done on our user base to kind of assess where most of our members were. And so we've kind of taken that kind of Problem of the Week approach, but really tied it to the Ultimate Beginner's Guide and the Super Users Workshop. And it doesn't follow the script exactly there, but generally in terms of the topics and concepts that we're covering, it's really at a more beginner level than the Problem of the Week, but takes a lot of what was working well in that general concept.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I second that. I think this is a brilliant initiative, especially for our beginner users, our users who are just getting familiar with how to problem solve with Power BI. And that's how we've tailored, particularly this week, but will be the same for the next few weeks. And the intention is to run these project-based sessions or these project-based initiatives on a fortnightly basis, and maybe even do like a 10-week cycle of these. So every 10 weeks we can get a new batch who are coming into our community, and they can get the same experience as beginners did, say the last quarter or the 10-week period before. So or the 10 session period before. So brilliant initiative, and I think just by the popularity of this first thread around the first solution that we were working through, this is going to be huge for the community. So thanks for putting it together, and I think today's session is going to be great as well, just to be able to collaborate with everyone and talk through some solutions and how to really solve for things in Power BI, no matter what sort of data sets you're dealing with. But it's a sort of like just building a framework around how to actually solve things and develop things in a really quality way inside of Power BI.
Yeah, exactly right, Sam. And one of the things that we drew from Problem of the Week was kind of putting you in the mindset of an expert to try to understand kind of how they break down and think about these sorts of problems. So as Sam does kind of what I call his speed build later today, and let me jump into my slides here and just kind of talk through what we're going to do today.
Yeah.
Okay, are you seeing that okay?
We're seeing the sort of back end of PowerPoint, not actually the full slide itself.
Not the full slides.
Yeah. It's sort of like, it's like your screen, which is allowing you to control the slides rather than the actual slides themselves. Do you want to go back to the actual PowerPoint presentation, or you like without go back to the Power BI editor, PowerPoint editor, rather than the actual presentation?
Okay. Let me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let me jump into that. You can see that. Okay.
Yep. That's good.
Okay. So what we really wanted to do today was to focus on some key concepts from the week 1 problem, talk through some simple DAX measures, really spend much of the time talking about the concept of context, which for anybody who's kind of into the Power BI learning cycle, that's probably the most critical concept to understand. Talk a little bit about, some tricks with the filter pane, the extended date table. Then what we wanted to do was have Sam actually go through his solution start to finish. And I think you'll be amazed at how quickly he kind of builds that up and some of the tricks he uses in putting together kind of a high quality report in a hurry. Then we wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, kind of general questions about either this particular problem set or just the general concepts that are covered and addressed in this week's problem. And then if we have some time, we want to keep this to an hour, but if we have some time, we'll do an intro to the week 2 problem that just dropped on the forum late last night. So let's kind of dive right in. That the reason we chose this particular exercise.
Brian, just quickly, could you just on the screen, you just need to scroll up a little bit because we can't see the title of your page.
How's that?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, cool.
So the question is, kind of why did we choose this problem as the first problem? And I think one of the things we wanted to illustrate was the misconception that in order to create a useful Power BI report, you need to understand a lot of DAX and a lot of complex modeling concepts and visualization concepts. That I think if I were seeing this report for the first time, if this were my first interaction with Power BI, I would think this is magic. The ability to slice, to filter, to dynamically visualize the different charts, the different matrices, and have each analysis kind of linked to each other and filtering each other. That's pretty amazing. And the fact that you're able to do that with only two lines of DAX and something that can be constructed by a relative beginner within an hour, I think really shows the overall power of Power BI. And the question is kind of how is that possible? If you were to think about building this in Excel or another tool, it would take you a lot longer and you'd have a lot less functionality. And so in a word, the answer is context. And I want to talk through just kind of briefly kind of what we mean when we talk about context. And in starting that, I want to talk about just the simple measures that we use today. We basically just used one sum measure and one count rows measure. And these are, as I mentioned here, these are the fundamental building blocks of DAX, that whenever you build an initial report, it's these very simple aggregate measures that you start with, and you kind of build up through a technique that we call measure branching into more complex measures. And the reason these measures are so powerful is really twofold. One of which is that they're flexibly evaluated within context. And I kind of think of these simple measures as water, in that they conform to whatever container you pour them into. So, if you have a yearly container, then it calculates yearly. If you have a container by customers, it calculates by customers, by regions, that you can really quickly and powerfully change the nature of that calculation just by changing the context. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a minute. And then the measure branching technique is one that I think measure branching is the term Sam coined for this. And really what it means is you kind of build up your complex measures based on these simple building blocks. So what I've got here is, that total sales measure that we used as our primary measure in this report. And if we wanted to take total sales for last year, we build out this calculate date add construct. But the basis of that would be to take our total sales measure and then build off of that. And it doesn't matter if you understand or not the specifics of this measure and how this works. We'll get into this in the week when we do time intelligence. But the key is that this total sales measure, the fundamental basic one, feeds into the more complex one. And then this measure, the total sales last year, might feed into an even more complex measure here. And so you can branch these measures 2 and 3 levels deep in a way that is really intuitive and easy to trace, just by kind of building up gradually in complexity and function. So when we talk about context, the key here, and this is something that you'll hear over and over for years when you work with DAX and with Power BI. And it may not, if you're just starting, it may not make complete sense initially, but as you work with DAX, you'll have these aha moments where this context will really click in and you begin to understand what DAX is doing when it evaluates a statement. And the evaluation that it does is something called evaluation context. And there are 2 components of that evaluation context that it evaluates when it determines the calculation for an expression. So a simple measure, for example, like that sum of total sales, that it looks at filter context and it looks at row context. And what we're doing here in this example is we're just looking at filter context. And filter context can come from 4 different sources. It can come from your slicers. It can come from your filter pane. It can come from your visuals. And it can also come directly from your DAX. And row context, on the other hand, comes from the physical row location within the table, or you can create row context within DAX. And we'll just take a quick look at what that looks like. So row context, what it means here is if you know that for your product ID is ENX 2005, then you know the values of all these other fields based on their sharing the same row context. And that is incredibly powerful knowledge that you can use within DAX for a variety of complex and powerful calculations. At the same time, filter context is what we use to really leverage those simple measures into the powerful analytical results that we got in this report. And if you look here, we've got 4 different ways in which filter context is coming in. We've got filter context coming in through the slicer. So in this case, 2018. So if you were to say, okay, what's the value of that total sales measure? My answer would be, I have no idea. That it depends entirely on what context you place it in. And the answer to that is dependent on all these different ways in which filter and row context interact. And so in this case, what we've got is we've got filter context coming in from our year slicer. We've got filter context coming in from our filter pane. So in the example where we ask for, the top 5 products by number of sales, or the top 5 salespersons by total sales, you can bring that filter context in directly through DAX, and that's a more complex way to do it. Totally valid, and probably the way you most commonly see it done. But we also wanted to show there's a simple way to do this, just by bringing it in through the filter pane and doing this top end filtering that brings basically that same filter context to the calculation in a different way. And then we've got the filter context that comes from the visual in terms of filtering by product name and also filtering by quarter. And one important thing to keep in mind is that even though this is set up in a row structure, this is still filter context. This is context coming in from the visual. It's not related to the physical placement of that information in the row tables. So if we jump back out to the report, what you can see is that just by these 2 very simple measures, and by leveraging the filter context from these visuals, from the slicers, from the filter pane that you don't see, we're able to create this really powerful report that dynamically can filter each of the other visuals, can really provide some powerful insights just by leveraging the context. And that's really, that's one of the primary points of emphasis that I wanted to just close with today, in that at least when I started with Power BI, I kind of had this desire to be able to write really complex DAX, as soon as possible, and kind of that I saw that as kind of where the power in Power BI came from. And the more I work with Power BI, what I see is the real power comes from being able to do things as simply as possible and just leveraging this context in a powerful way. So instead of trying to do the most complex thing, what I now try to do is the simplest thing and just let the program basically do the work for me. So at this point, I want to just kind of jump back and turn it over to Sam, and he can really show you kind of how he thought through this problem and how he put it together when he did it. And I think you'll gain some really, really powerful insights from just watching his technique.
Cool. Yeah, I'll just switch over to my screen here, Brian. Give me a second. So I'm just setting things up here. Cool. So the first thing, so yeah, I mean, thanks for diving into that in a little bit more detail, Brian. I mean, obviously context, is a perfect way to kickstart the Accelerator initiative here, because there's really nothing more key inside of Power BI, right? Understanding how Power BI produces results is, you have to understand the concept of context. This is something that, I learned very early on, and something that I try and stress whenever I'm discussing or trying to educate someone on how Power BI, or a team, how Power BI actually operates. But context is the true power of the DAX language. It enables you to create really great insights very quickly with such simple calculations, far simpler than it ever was inside of Power BI. There's no inside of Excel, sorry. There's no VLOOKUPs. There's no index and match. It's really just context and a very simple calculation. So what I first of all want to just quickly do, though, is I want to just talk through how I thought about the brief and how I came up with my solution before I even really started inside of my model, inside of my report. Because at least evaluating what you think you need to do first really speeds up what you do in the end, like what you actually do inside of Power BI as well. Okay. And so just by reading the brief, I was able to work out, okay, well, what are some of the key things that I'm going to need to do? What are my core calculations, like my simple measures I'm going to want to create? And then ultimately, what are some patterns of formulas that I'm going to want to branch out into? And we can show you two ways. I know that we are focused here on more sort of the simple calculations, but on top of that, I'll just quickly show you some of the other measures I've done as well. We won't go too deep into it because I know this is just beginner stuff, but I'll maybe just touch upon it for a brief moment. But okay, so let's read some of these things. So we want to work out what are the highest and lowest sales in a given year, okay? And what states were the sales high or low? How many sales did they make in their top 5 products each quarter? And who were the top 10 salespeople? So when I evaluate this, the first thing that I think, okay, I'm gonna need to work out total sales. Okay, simple. I'm also gonna want to work out the amount of sales that were done. So the total transactions. That is another calculation that I can do very quickly. So I think, okay, so I'm going to use the sum formula. I'm going to use count rows. Okay, those are the two formulas I'm going to use. And then whenever I see highest and lowest, I also actually think about rank X and top N. These are some more advanced functions that you can use around ranking. Things like top 5 products, top 10 salespeople. These can be done with these more. I mean, they're not even really that advanced formulas, but they're just the ranking type formulas. You can, though, with the functionality built into Power BI, get quite far without even having to use those functions, which is quite cool. Okay, so let's just do a quick speed build. Okay, so this is ultimately what I came up with, but I'm going to recreate it here without having to. I won't actually write out the formulas because I've got most of them, but all I did first of all was I checked the model. Okay, so this is really crucial in any piece of development. Before you do anything, you want to come to your model to understand it, because guess what? The context comes from your model. It comes from the tables and the relationships that you have inside of your model. So we know that context is the most important concept to understand what results you are getting, to understanding how results are evaluated. And the main thing that drives context is your model. And so what I always like to do is I like to basically, in my mind, understand exactly how this model works when I'm not even looking at it. So I want to set this up in a way that it is as intuitive as it can be. And I have this technique that I call the waterfall technique, where I have my lookup tables up the top and the relationships are all flowing down to my fact tables down the bottom. So I always know that any filter or any context coming from here is going to come down these relationships and hit my fact table and then filter my calculations that I'm doing. Okay. Once I've got that in my mind, like this is set up so simply that I really have to come back here, right? Because I can be over here and then I can be thinking in my mind, okay, well, I know how the filter is going to work. I know my customers and my products table, they're going to filter my fact table. As simple as that. Okay.
It's funny, Sam, that is such an intuitive way to set up the model that I find when I get files on the forum or somebody sends me a report that's not set up that way, the absolute first thing I have to do is put it in that waterfall structure, or else the model just doesn't make any sense to me.
Oh, it's exactly the same for me. Whenever I see a model that has tables everywhere, relationships crossing over everywhere, I find it so hard to understand it. I find it so hard to work out a solution because my brain is not wired to have to contend with all of these potential relationships going from one table to another. It just totally jumbles my mind in terms of what measures are actually required. And so having it as intuitive as possible like this, no matter what data you're working with, it honestly just simplifies things down like by a factor of 5 for me. And I'm sure that would be the same for everyone. And that's why I just keep harping. It's not the most exciting thing to talk about, but it is just so essential when working inside of Power BI. We have a quick question here. Can there be more than one model in Power BI? I believe you can create like a different look to your model. That's what these additional pages are, but you can only really have one model, I think. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's true. One model per report. You can drill down across reports, but in terms of per report, it's only one model.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so just quickly how we went about solving some of these other ones. Always start simple. So I started with my sum, right? We want to work out highs and lows of sales. And so all I did was I calculated my total sales using a sum. Okay, simple as that. And with this, I can change up the results that I get with this simple sum in so many different ways now by utilizing my model, by utilizing context from my model, right? So I know that I need to solve, okay, within any particular year, what are the highs and lows of that particular year? Let's just quickly jump back to we need the highest and lowest sales in any given year. You know, it's like that particular question is you could actually read into that question in many different ways. Like, what is the highest and lowest sales? Is it the highest and lowest sales for a product? Is it the lowest for a customer? But in this particular case, we had an example here. So I presumed that it was sort of by month and year, right? So it could be like quarterly. What's your highest quarterly sale versus lowest quarterly sale? So that it leaves a little bit to interpretation for this one. But in this particular case, we'll just keep it simple and we'll break it down by months. Okay. So I'm going to grab my in my date table, I'm going to grab my month and year. And this month and year is going to provide the context for my chart like that. Now, the other thing we want to do, though, is we want to be able to break this down by year. So I'm gonna create a filter out the side here. And I'm going to make this a drop down. No, actually a list, sorry. And then what I did in my solution was I changed this around to horizontal. Like so. And so what I could do now is then I can select my year and then I can get my, this is the way that I can evaluate my highs and lows, right? And then the same for geography. So we wanted to see, okay, where were the high stores and where were the low stores? That was the second one. And so all I did here was, again, I just grabbed a column from one of my lookup tables, like so, right? And that gives me all of my states. And then again, I just put my total sales in here. And so I didn't even need to use a ranking or anything like that in this particular case, because the context provided me all I needed around my total sales measure to see, okay, well, what were the highest performing stores and what were the lowest performing stores? And that's, you know, it's really as simple as that. So very quickly, we've been able to solve two of these questions from the brief just with a simple measure and the context created from our model. And then we also had, okay, what were the top performing stores by quarter, right? Or the top performing products by quarter, sorry. Top performing products by quarter. And so to do that, I think let's just have a play around. I actually did mine a little bit differently, I think. So we'll have a play around with the quarter and year. One of my other tips is always keep things in a table, okay, to begin with. This is huge. So you can actually truly understand the context. It's always easier to understand the context when you look at every result individually within a table. So I'm going to grab my total sales up here. And then within this filter field, I believe we can actually create that top end. Now, what's interesting with this particular question in the brief as well, it is actually open to interpretation also. Because think about it. How many sales did they make from the top 5 products each quarter? You could look at this a couple of different ways. You could say, okay, well, what were just the top 5 products for that quarter? But you could also say, well, what were the top 5 products from the beginning of, like, what are our top 5 products forever? And how did they perform in each of those quarters? So there's a couple of ways that you can actually dissect that particular question. I think how we evaluated it here was we just wanted to evaluate the top 5 products and how they actually performed. And so we could sort of say, okay, top 5 products were X amount, like were 20% of, or sorry, top 5 products were say 60% of all of our sales. That was a way to, well, that's the way I sort of thought of it. So
and one point on this one is this one on the brief was based on number of sales.
So this was to do with count rows. This was
Yes.
the transactions. Okay. Well, we'll dive into that. So again, I obviously didn't read the brief closely enough, but very, very easy to solve. If we're just looking at like number of sales. And so what I'm going to do is create a measure called total transactions. And these are always really common core measures that you'll create, right? Count rows. And then all I need to do for count rows is add my sales table, right? So this is going to count up every single row after context is applied. And that's basically every single transaction, right? And so I'm going to bring this particular, sorry, it's just evaluating a little bit slowly. So I'm going to bring this into my table. So we can see, like, in terms of trying to understand what, this is a good practice, trying to understand why you're getting these results. Okay, so in this particular example, in the Q1 2019, we are stating here that we have made 1,219 sales or transactions in that particular time period, and the total amount of sales that we achieved from those transactions is 2.8 million, etc., etc. Okay. Now we can get rid of this particular result here, total sales. So we're only looking at total transactions. And then if we wanted to evaluate just the top 5 here, I need to bring in my product column, don't I, Brian?
Yes.
I did it a slightly different way. That's right. So I bring what I can do is I can bring is it in this visual product into this particular. So I bring my product into this particular visual in the filter pane. I can go top N. This is quite a cool functionality actually. So I can go top N and I can say top 5, and then this is where I need to put in my total transactions, I presume.
Correct.
And then I want to apply filter. So this is a quick way. So you'll see how this will change. A quick way to apply a filter like so. Okay. Now, I want to tell you a few downsides about this, okay? I want to tell you a few downsides, even though this was fine for the solution. Few additional things you need to do to make sure that it's very clear what you have done. Because look at what has happened to the result. It's changed, right? But the title of my particular measure has not changed at all. And so how does anyone know that this is only top 5 when they're viewing it? They don't really, users don't get visibility over these filter planes generally. It can show up in their reports, but no one really will look at it. And so what you would need to do in this particular case is you would need to change the name of this column here, okay? You'd have to. So you'd have to go top 5 products, something like this, okay? Top 5 products. And then that is going to change the name there, and that's how you're going to get this particular result. And then what you could also do then is potentially create another. So when you change it, I think you can add it again. Or does it go back? No, it goes back because you've actually changed this entire visual. Okay, so anyway, all I will say is that is a pretty cool technique, but I feel like there is a few downsides there, and that's why generally I would use a formula instead. But maybe we'll leave that for another day. Today is more just about context and how you can create it, right? Okay, so maybe we would turn it into a visualization like this. And then what was the last one? I'll just quickly jump through that go into the last one as well.
Top 10 salespersons.
Top 10 salespeople in any given year. So this is going to be quite similar, isn't it? We're going to drag customer name in here, and then we'll drag our total sales in. And I presume you can go and do a top 10 here as well. So I'm just going to bring this in here. And I'll do 10 filter. And that gives me the top 10 very quickly. That's pretty handy, isn't it? That is pretty cool. And I can change that around. And then maybe the thing that you need to do here is instead of changing, say, this particular column name here, you probably want to change the title of the visual instead. So you probably want to come to the paint roller, come to the title and say total sales by customer, and then maybe top 10 or something like that. What I think, when I actually went to solve this as well, is particularly for this one, top 5 products by quarter and year, probably like a better insight there, just to round things off, is you probably want to sort of see, okay, what is the percentage sales of your top 5 products? So this was me just trying to tell a better story, is not just saying the amount. You can show the amounts, but also you want to give it a bit of color for the consumer. Like, what is the percentage of transactions that went for the top 5 products versus all of the sales that we made, just so someone can understand. Like, when they just look at this, there's no way for them to compare or to understand, like, what is this amount compared to our total sales, just so people can sort of get a much better idea of, or the consumer can get a much better idea of what they're actually looking at. So how I did that in my other solution here is this. So this was my end solution. And I actually did it. I obviously didn't interpret the brief as well as I probably should, but I did it based on sales. And I said, okay, well, let's have a look at, yes, the actual number, the top 5 products by sales in each of these quarters, but then also, what is the percentage versus all sales? I actually provided that insight as well in the very same report page. So a consumer can get that insight really, really quickly. And so if I change to a different year, you're going to be able to really quickly see, okay, well, in the first quarter, 12%, that equated to 12% for our top 5, rather than just seeing a number here and just trying to understand, okay, is this a big number? Is this a small number in context to other amounts that we've sold in the past, or other quarters, the other performance of quarters?
And Sam, if I can jump in, I think what you did there is exactly what we're encouraging people to do, which is to make sure you understand kind of the concept of what the brief and the problem is trying to get at. But then if you've got additional knowledge or skill, and you want to kind of take the problem a step further or two, feel free to basically say, okay, we can create better insights than what's in the brief, and do that in the context of your solution. That there's no right or wrong here. That I look at what Sam did, and I would absolutely say, that is a much more powerful insight than what we had in the brief. Now, we hadn't gone through some of the concepts that he used to get that number, so we stuck to the simpler case for now. But if you've got the inclination and the capability to jump in and make those sorts of modifications, please feel free to do that. And when you post your solution, the goal is really to learn from each other and to see how people interpreted the brief, how they kind of took the brief and made it their own in terms of additional insights. And so, I really just want to, what Sam did is what I, want to encourage anybody to feel free to do. But at the same time, don't feel you need to. We've kind of scaled this so that for the person kind of at a rough beginner level, it should take just about an hour. We've got a advisory team that's kind of testing that to make sure. And so we're not looking for it to be onerous in any way, but as I say, if you've got the time and inclination to throw some additional insight and flair into it, absolutely feel free to do that.
That's great. Is there anything else that I can go into, Brian? Do you think that would be valuable to the discussion, or at least from a problem-solving perspective, how to go about something similar? Or
one thing, Sam, that I think might be helpful is just that when you went into your report already set up, to talk through kind of how you sorted the dates, particularly the month and year.
Yeah.
For somebody who isn't used to particularly dealing with that extended date table.
Yep. So not too difficult. It really is just knowing where to go, like knowing the problem, and then knowing how to quickly solve it, obviously. So whenever you get a date table, and we highly recommend using the date table, the extended date table, which is on both the forum but also in the analyst hub as well, if you have access to the analyst hub. And what it does is it gives you this comprehensive table that has everything around a date table that you would need. And it enables you to create it in less than 30 seconds as well. And so just by importing some code into the query editor, it creates this entire table based on the date parameters that you input. Now, the one thing about this particular table that you need to sort quite quickly is that some of these columns are text columns, and they don't understand how to sort themselves. Well, they'll try and sort themselves by alphabetical order when that's not the case in terms of like dates, because you want it to be January, February, March, so on and so forth, right? And so two of these columns, which you always find you need to sort, are the month and year column, because you see here that it's actually a text-based column. And the other one is quarter and year, because that's a text-based column as well. But what this table has, which is really awesome, is that it has these supporting columns which enable you to create that sorting, the correct sorting for the calendar year. Okay, so to actually do the sorting is actually quite easy. It's just knowing where to go. Is you highlight the column that you want to sort, and then you go sort by column. Okay, so it's in column tools, and you just go sort by column. And then what you do is you try and find that particular sorting column, which is the month and year. Month in year. So if I just scroll down here, you'll see that it's already selected month in year. I select that, and now my column is going to be sorted based on this numeric column, which is right next to it. Okay, and so it's a quick fix, something that you got to do every time, but it doesn't take long. And once you do it once or twice, you just always know how to do it from then on out, so it's no issue. And then I did the same for the quarter and year, so on and so forth.
And Sam, that's a great explanation. I'll mention that for those who are not used to using this table and you're not sure which supporting column to use to sort which other columns, we've got a cheat sheet for you that lays out every column and then what you sort it by. So that's available. We've got a link to that on the forum. It's available under resources in the portal site. So if you need that, I keep a copy of it just pinned up by my desk, just because even after working with that table for more than a year, there are always columns I have to remind myself what the supporting column is.
Great. So what is there? Do you feel like I feel like we've covered off most of the topics that were key to this first iteration of the accelerator. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I think so, but I want to hear from folks. I see we've got a few questions, but I think that from my perspective, Sam, I think that that hit all the high points.
Great. So Kendall does have a question. Will we ever need a bridge table? Yes. So even though, you always want to aim for this sort of waterfall look or a snowflake look, whatever you want to call it, in your data model, you can have slight differences than something as simple as that. You always, I feel, want to aim for that simple structure, that simple look and feel to your model. But yes, you might have an intermediary table, you might have a supporting table, you might have 2 layers to your fact tables, you might have multiple fact tables. So there can be small changes, but to me, like, honestly, they're quite rare. Like, if you really aim for the simplest look. So I would say 10% of the time is you might have these slightly different tables that you need to integrate into your model, and really it's just a matter of just logically thinking through, how do you want the filters to work inside your model, how do you want the context to play out inside your model, and it's really just small iterations on that initial look and feel to your model.
Sam, I would add to that, in terms of for a bridge table, the reason you would use that is to address a many-to-many relationship. And I used to use those fairly regularly when I had a many-to-many, and I don't use them at all anymore, because I think there's a better way to do it through the use of the treat as function. And so if you're running into a situation where you've got an unavoidable many-to-many that you can address through denormalization or some other restructuring of your data model, I think personally that treat as is a better way to handle that than bridge tables. They'll accomplish the same thing, but I think treat as makes for a cleaner, easier to understand data model. What do you think, Sam?
Totally agree. When I saw the functionality of that treat as function and I used it for the first time with like a budgeting table, it was just like blown away. It just simplifies your formulas and your entire model just like crazy. So yeah, couldn't agree more. So Kendall's got another question. Can the month and year be sorted in an M? No, I don't believe so. It needs to be done exactly that way as I demonstrated. Unfortunately, maybe they'll come out with a way to simplify that. I mean, it makes sense, but everyone creates their date tables in different ways, so it's not actually as straightforward as it's not even though we feel like that is the best way to create a date table. Some people create date tables through formulas and calculated tables and things like that. So it's not, if they were to provide a solution, it wouldn't actually be for everyone. It would just be for, this one way that we think is the best way to do things.
And I would say on that, if there was a way to do it in M, Melissa would have done it.
Yep. What is preferred, count rows or count? What do you think, Brian?
I think either will work. Count will be on a specific field. Count rows is on a table. I typically, for some reason, just tend to gravitate toward count rows. I don't know that there's a performance or other reason to prefer one or the other.
Yeah, I'm the same. I don't think it really matters, but my guess is that count rows is probably better. Is probably better performance-wise, just because count is actually looking through like actual results in each different row, whilst count rows is literally just counting up rows. So that's my guess, but I honestly probably I don't really know, and I don't think it really matters for the majority of cases. So one thing that I'm personally quite big on is that I'm not too hung up on the nuances of like every single formula and the performance of every single formula. I know this is quite common in other spaces, but I think DAX, and I've been saying this a little bit now for a while, has been massively overcomplicated, and there's just no need in a lot of cases to understand, is this formula 5% better than that formula? Like, the reality is that if you build your model well and you follow best practices, it doesn't even matter. Like, this stuff does not matter, and you should just do what is just make sure you get those best practices right, so that everything works and functions well within your report. and then just do what you're most comfortable with DAX. Just think about, well, what's the most simplest way that I can get this calculation or get these results using formulas. That's my take.
Yeah, I really tend to go with what I think of as kind of pick and stick, which is there's a whole lot of functions, and particularly when you get into time intelligence, there's a massive array of different DAX functions that do largely the same thing. And what I tend to do is kind of, I think you can drive yourself a little bit crazy trying to learn all of them. And so what I do is use the kind of the core 3 or 4 and just basically build everything kind of from scratch using those. And so I would say, kind of take the range of functions that you're comfortable with, really learn those inside and out, and don't worry about, kind of learning every nuance of every possible DAX function, because many of them overlap and do the same thing.
Yeah. And in a lot of cases, like you can create, and we see this with all the challenges that we've seen in the past, right? Like you can create incredible solutions and your formulas can be simple. Like a good solution doesn't include complex formulas, doesn't include complex DAX. Like it's all to do with the 4 pillars, right? The 4 pillars, it comes back to the framework around how we believe Power BI should be attacked, like querying and transforming data modeling, DAX calculations, reports and visualizations. All of these parts of Power BI development are absolutely key. It's not just about writing complex formulas, complex DAX to get these fancy results.
And I would kind of put in a plug for week 2 of Accelerator, because in week 2 of Accelerator, we're really focusing on data modeling. And I would say if you had to, I mean, all 4 of the pillars are important and you need to learn all of them. I would say if there was one that was more important than the others, I would say it's data modeling. Because if you set your model up correctly, it makes everything else fall into place. And if your model is not set up correctly, you can be the most knowledgeable DAX expert in the world and you're not going to get good results. And so, kind of developing really good fundamentals and really good understanding around your data model, I think is probably particularly at the, kind of your early stage of your Power BI journey, is probably the best time investment you can make.
That's great. And I see that the round 2 of the Accelerator is up on the forum already, which is great. I can just maybe quickly share my screen and show everyone. So I'm just on the forum here, and week 2 is already up. So Brian put it up the other day, yesterday by the looks of it. And so It's all based on data. Well, it's got a real focus on data modeling. Is that right? That's right?
It is. It's a really common scenario that basically, you're working with a client and you ask for, the most current data, and they give you just a big flat file.
Yeah.
And before you can do any of the analysis they want, you've got to take and transform that flat file into a dimensional data model with your fact tables and your dimension or lookup tables, and set that up in kind of a clean, disciplined way that is kind of optimal for the way Power BI wants data to be handled. And so when Sam said, in his speed build, the first thing he does is look at the data model. That's really, kind of that sort of, clean data model with one-to-many relationships with the dimension tables up at the top. That's really what you want to build out from that flat file. And learning how to do that and kind of figuring out, okay, within that just big jumble of data, what are your dimension tables? What's your fact table? Which fields group together within each dimension table? That is probably, I would say, one of the most important skills to develop. And so, this example that you'll find in week 2 is a scenario you will come upon. If you do a lot of Power BI development, I would say you'll come upon this almost weekly, where you get a just a big flat file from somebody, and they say, okay, I want some analysis done from this, and you've got to build out the data model.
Couldn't agree more. So great. I'm looking forward to jumping into that one as well. What I think we'll do here, Brian, is round off. I've actually got to jump into another call myself. So I guess from me, big thank you to everyone for joining in on this call. Thanks for all your collaboration and engagement during it. And once again, a huge thank you to Brian for throwing this together. I think this is huge for us. We've had a lot of requests for sort of more project-based, problem-solving type initiatives through the community. And I think this has been a wonderful start to that, and have really enjoyed it from start to finish, from working through the solution and being on today's call. So thanks, Brian, for setting it all up.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for everybody for participating. I see somebody saying they just missed the webinar. We are going to have this taped and up for members to watch. And
yep.
Before the session, Sam and I were talking about ways to make this even more community and more interactive. And so I think what we're going to do the next time is try to do this on a Zoom platform, so that we can actually, instead of just chat, we can actually, talk directly and ask questions and have these sorts of conversations. So thanks again to everybody, and look forward to moving on to week 2.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, everybody.